Hello, this is the Food Institute podcast series. For over 90 years, the Food Institute has been the best single source for current, timely, and relevant information about the food industry. My name is Brian Choi. I'm managing partner and CEO. And today we have our special guest, Paul Joseph. He is of counsel from a law firm in Washington, D.C. called Foley. Paul, welcome today.
Thank you, Brian. Thanks for having me.
And why don't you share a little bit about yourself and about your firm and the expertise that you bring to your firm?
Sure, absolutely. Thanks. I'm with the firm Foley and Lardner. It's one of the top 50 largest firms in the United States. We have offices all over the place, including multiple foreign countries. Mexico City office is a newish office for us in the past 2 years. I joined the DC office of Foley and Lardner about 6 months or so ago, and my two previous work experiences before that were at the Department of Justice, where I was a narcotics prosecutor for many years, and then I went to the FDA, where I did regulatory and enforcement work, including being on the interagency working group related to cannabis. And so, with those two pieces of work experience at DOJ and FDA, it pretty much covers almost all things cannabis related. And because of that, as soon as I joined the firm, I've been getting a lot of companies who are seeking our team's counsel on cannabis related compliance, legal issues, and regulatory issues as well.
Wow, that's great. And in terms of in the whole topic of cannabis, it's had a long and storied history, and I wanted to get your thoughts on the cannabis industry in general, where historically it was one of the areas where it was somewhat taboo for companies to invest in, and it just seems like the past 3 years there's been a huge wave of change in the industry, from a regulatory standpoint, and even from a business acceptance standpoint. Wanted to get your thoughts on what has really led to this dramatic shift in opinion, and where we are today.
Sure, absolutely. There's essentially been two kind of seismic events in recent years that have led to a large growth in cannabis, like broad, including like marijuana related stuff, but also non-marijuana related hemp and CBD issues. The first one is essentially states, starting with Colorado, taking steps to, in their specific states, legalize marijuana for multiple different purposes. Many states had already done it in the medicinal marijuana space, but now they call it adult use. Some people call it recreational use. And now we're up to, I guess, 11 states plus the District of Columbia have unlimited adult use marijuana. And then if you add the states that have medicinal use marijuana, we're essentially at a majority of U.S. states now legalize some form of cannabis. That's the first seismic event. The second one was in 2018 when the Congress passed what's called the Farm Bill, the 2018 Farm Bill, which essentially removed hemp, which is a part of the cannabis plant, from the definition that's used in the Controlled Substance Act. What that ended up doing was making it a federally legal substance. So now anything derived from hemp, and CBD seems to be getting most of the publicity these days, that has become has opened up the world of CBD type products. There's some confusion there that we'll get into, because it's still governed by the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, but because it's now a legal substance, the markets for both marijuana and cannabinoid products have just been slowly getting bigger.
What's interesting is that I noticed that in places like Canada, there's been a faster adoption to cannabis there. And is there is there a reason why Canada has kind of been at the forefront of this rather than their U.S.? Do you have any insight into that?
I haven't as much studied the differences, I guess, at the federal level between Canada and the U.S. I know more that, at least on the U.S. side, and as we talk about this, maybe that will explain why Canada may not have some of these issues, but it's like a loose coalition of different interests that have all led to liberalized views on cannabis. One part is just generational views. Younger people, uh, uh, you know, they they think things like alcohol and opioids and pharmaceuticals are part of the problem, and this natural plant that seems to get demonized, they don't consider it as bad as older generations do. There's a whole law and order element to it where people think if we legalize it, we tax it, there can be employment in this area, but we can remove the criminal element that's currently running the black or illegal markets. That's another motivating force to legalization. And then there's appears to slowly be immense therapeutic benefits and promises that research is uncovering, and that seems to be another driving force. In Canada, I'm not quite sure why they took that first step to federally legalize it. I think I think that might just be uh, I know their provincial system can cause some problems, but our 50 state structure and our long history of states' rights, I think it ends up making us a state ball game for cannabis.
Right. Very, very interesting. Like I first noticed it, as in my former life as an investment banker and also as an investor, seeing companies like Canopy Growth and seeing that, they're headquartered in Canada. That really kind of put cannabis at the forefront for me as an investor and as I advise um, investors in, either on the private equity side, but also on the family office side. That's where I first noticed and it caught my attention. So, thanks for offering, your.
No, no, but that's a really good point. I mean, the fact that it's federally legal in Canada, and Canada and Uruguay, I think, are the two places that made it federally legal, and Mexico was on its way there until the COVID-19 outbreak kind of held up their legislative process. But because it's federally illegal, all the businesses can actually come in and they could run every part of the country. They don't have to worry about banking issues. They don't have to worry about certain tax issues. And in the U.S., because it's not federally legal, a lot of the big players, a lot of the big companies, a lot of the multi-state players are not getting into this yet until it becomes until there's federal legislation that provides them either safe harbor or protection.
Right. Got it. Um, One other aspect of cannabis that's been in the news recently is with the whole impact that the coronavirus is having in the U.S. and even globally. I've seen a lot more news items that people are now selling cannabis in a much more open way than they have been in the past. Can you speak to a little bit about what's been happening recently and the impact that the coronavirus is having on the cannabis industry?
Sure. I mean, what we've seen is there's been a huge dramatic increase in the numbers of the quantities of cannabis that are being sold over the past month or so. But part of that seems to be the same run on certain types of goods that occurred with like people running out of toilet paper and certain types of food. It seems to be people who are worried about an extended shutdown going up and buying up longer and larger supplies of cannabis, thinking that it may not always be there and they may be limited in their opportunities to go and get it. So at this point, I think that those are just temporary upturns in the sales of cannabis. They're also thinking that governmental authorities have a lot on their plate. They're not focusing on what you might be doing from a cannabis regulatory standpoint. So they're probably doing it more openly for that reason as well. but everyone believes that that will kind of taper off and level off. It's not going to have that still high spike of cannabis sales. But if the economy is affected long term, that's certainly going to affect the long term cannabis market, especially some of these companies that were just starting to get off the ground. If the economy takes a hit, who knows? That could be kind of devastating to those companies.
Right. One of the things that you mentioned in the article that you wrote up in a report, and I found it to be quite shocking, is just the size, the potential size of the cannabis market, and you mentioned that in one of the reports that the global market for cannabis, could reach up to 25, 26 billion in 2022. Just wanted to yeah, ask you, like, what is the US's kind of market share in that figure, or just some ballpark, like how big the US market share could be of that global 20, 25, 26 billion.
Sure, that I think dealt with edibles specifically, and the North American estimate for edibles in 2022 is going to be around 4 billion. Right now, it's probably about 1.5 billion. Again, it still kind of is dwarfed by like the alcohol industry, that's $58 billion right now. But all the projections, based on the same trending of increased state legalization, no major change in enforcement policy. And then also the elephant in the room is we're still waiting for more research. If research came back that some of the some of the negative issues were more pronounced than people realized, that could negatively affect the markets as well. But right now for food and beverages, the markets just have an immense upside potential. People are using it in coffees and teas, all the beverages, functional waters, energy drinks, sports drinks. And then to the extent that the FDA kind of allows it as an ingredient, which will allow the alcohol enforcement units to allow it in beer and liquor, that's an immense area that there's a really upside market potential for cannabis and liquor.
It's very interesting. You mentioned the health impacts. I haven't really looked at the academic research as it relates to the health impacts that cannabis has. Based on your background in cannabis, and is it true that does cannabis have a positive impact for a person's health?
There is immense anecdotal evidence that it does. But I think the answer to that question, all sides would agree, is it's too early to tell. The amount of high level, like randomized, double blind trial work and clinical evidence is limited at this point. Everyone agrees with that. There was a hearing in January on the Hill, which was essentially talking about the cannabis policies for the next decade, and the three panel members were the three government entities that kind of oversee research in this area: the DEA, the FDA, and then NIH. And the takeaway from, in a bipartisan fashion from all members, was that there was just not enough research. We needed more data. One major issue has been the DEA, and a lot of people in the cannabis industry kind of decry this, has like a stranglehold over who can do research. And they have to, every part of their clinical research plan has to be overseen, and they also have to get their strains of cannabis from a DEA registered or approved facility. And right now in the U.S., there's this monopoly. The University of Mississippi has a contract with NIH. They grow the strains of cannabis that are used for the majority of research in the United States. And many researchers complain that it's limited strains, some of it's moldy, some of it's poor quality. A handful of researchers have been able to get approved marijuana products from outside the country, usually Canada. But again, it's a very lengthy process, the application to research. And as a result of that, we don't have a lot of hard data to basically back up or substantiate the promising claims. And on the CBD side, if it's hemp derived, that's only been legalized since the 2018 Farm Bill. So again, uh, uh, we don't have a long history of clinical research on hemp derived claims as well.
Got it. And I would imagine, the health benefits will probably be the major deciding factor of when the FDA, or if the FDA has a positive ruling on CBD. Is that a fair statement? Fair statement?
Well, I would say it's a double. It's not just are the positive claims effective. I think what the FDA is zeroing in on now is actually potential negative effects. So there's been some concerns about liver toxicity, about interactions with other drugs, about extreme drowsiness is one side effect apparently. So they're going to want to make sure that it's been tested on specific vulnerable populations. Pregnant women is one area that they've specifically noted to Congress that they're concerned about. They're actually conducting their own research. The FDA generally does not do its own research. It reviews the research conducted by others, both for process and content, and then it approves or doesn't approve products. But in this area, they've gone out of their way to start researching specific products and on specific vulnerable populations. And then dosage is the other big kind of elephant in the room. Even if they approve it, they want to know what's going to happen if you take it daily. If you take it, what milligram quantities you need to take for it to be safe, and what it does if it's heated up, if it's in certain types of food. And dosage is essentially a problem with cannabis in general. It's a plant. It's really hard to get consistent, um, specific quality and content. It's more like like a wine. Different wines have different good years and bad years, and people in the cannabis space talk about it that way.
Yeah, interesting. So it could potentially be, uh, is it possible that if it'll require another 5 years, another 10 years? Is there any sort of timeline that you think that the FDA will have enough data to actually make a ruling?
Well, I guess at that point we have to focus on the differences that we haven't really talked about between kind of THC related products, which are in marijuana, and then the hemp side. It might be good for me to just take a quick second to kind of explain some of the differences. Um, Essentially, when we talk about cannabis, it's the specific plant that gets most people talk about, or is the cannabis sativa plant. And the plant has many unique chemical compounds that are called cannabinoids. And we're still just scratching the surface about our knowledge of the cannabinoids, as well as the endocannabinoid system in humans that had not traditionally been taught in medical school. And now it's starting to get a lot of interest in the science and medical professions. But experts believe that there's, at least over 100 cannabinoids in the cannabis plant, and the two most abundant ones and the ones that get the most research are known as THC and CBD. And THC stands for tetrahydrocannabinol, and that's essentially the psychoactive component within marijuana. It's the one that provides the intoxicating sensation of being high. And then the second most abundant, or the other most abundant cannabinoid is known as CBD, and that's cannabinol. I'm sorry, cannabidol, and that's a compound that does not have a psychoactive component. And it's the range of conditions people talk about it being used for are for epileptic seizures, for PTSD, anxiety, inflammation, sleeplessness. Um, so the THC and the CBD sides of the house, right now, the FDA's focus is not on THC. It's still not federally legal. People are, you can try to get it approved through the drug process, and the DEA will have to approve it. The DEA has actually, and the FDA has approved some products that either have natural or synthetic THC in it. They'll end up being scheduled controlled substances. But what everyone's talking about now with FDA rolling out its policies, enforcement policies, as well as regulations, that's on the non-psychoactive, non-THC CBD side of the house. So as far as timing, you were just mentioning, at the hearing in January, they said it may take up to 2 to 3 years for a decision, but everyone believed until the COVID-19 outbreak happened. They pegged late 2020 or early 2021 as the time when the FDA would actually roll out a specific enforcement discretion policy, as well as regulations on dosage amounts, labeling, what kind of testing needs to be done. But at this point, it's going to be delayed. I think there's no doubt that all parts of the regulatory agency are now being redirected to coronavirus related issues. In my practice alone, we talk to the FDA on a kind of daily basis lately, Saturday, Sunday, even at night. There's a whole host of coronavirus related matters that are taking up a lot of bandwidth at the agency. And I think there will certainly be delays.
Right. Potentially another year or two, or is it even longer than that?
No, I think I would say I would have to ballpark it because partly because there is so intense white hot interest from Congress and industry and a lot of financial players who are, strongly looking to invest in this area. They want a decision rolled out sooner rather than later. And I think because of that, it's likely to be, I would say, less than a year. I would have said in the next 4 or 5 months if it wasn't for the coronavirus outbreak. But I would say within the next year they'll roll out a policy, but it's gonna be altered based on what they end up finding out from the research that they're conducting and research that other people are conducting. If it seems like some of the risks are more severe than they thought, they might either delay or that'll shape what kind of policy they have. But you certainly can't do a few things they've outlined from the very beginning. You cannot claim that it has some sort of specific curative therapeutic value, like treating cancer, for example, or a whole host of other issues. You certainly have to be clear and not false in your kind of marketing related to it. It has to be labeled accurately, and then you have to properly like test for impurities such as heavy metals and make sure there's not pesticides in there. And they're likely going to have special warnings for either it's going to be for adults. They can't be marketed to children or pregnant women. That's going to be a component of their enforcement discretion policy. And they've even stated as recently as earlier this month when they reported back to Congress on the status of creating an enforcement discretion policy. They've stated it's going to be a risk-based assessment based on the science that comes back.
Do you find a lot of companies are not following those guidelines? Like, or let me ask it this way: how many companies in do you know that are following those guidelines to a T versus those that are trying to get around some of the stringent guidelines?
Yeah, I mean that's the thing. The guidelines aren't out yet. That's part of the problem. Right now, it's essentially the Wild West at the federal level. It's there's states have specific rules, but you just kind of pointed to a big problem in the entire cannabis industry, which is essentially what people are saying is it disincentivizes people following all the rules. They have to spend a lot of money for a license. They have to spend money for legal and financial counsel. They have a lot of overhead. And on the other side, there are people who've never wanted to follow the rules. They're working in the black market, either on the internet or or the straight marijuana side, and they can charge, you know, lower prices, and it's putting heavy pressure on the legal marijuana and CBD industry.
Right. No, that makes sense. And yeah, it seems that the especially just looking at on the financial side, seeing these companies like Canopy, reach a peak, upon to say about a year and a half ago, and to see their stock prices complete, 70% down from from their peaks. Seems like a lot of the interest has gone down since just a year or 2 years ago. What do what how are you advising companies that deal in these types of products? Like, what sort of advice are you giving them on what to look out for, kind of best practices to follow?
Yeah, I mean, you hit on a big issue. Part of it is just the natural movements of a nascent industry. There was kind of a gold rush at the beginning. Is a very unique scenario. People are comparing it to the end of prohibition for alcohol and a merger of that and the beginning of the internet. A lot of people with good ideas and good intent came into the market, and the problem being they a lot of them just are not, they're not used to running businesses. They're not business savvy. Uh, and then there's a lot of investors at the same thing. They like the idea. They didn't necessarily look at the financial metrics underpinning companies, and so a lot of money was flowing into the space. And then essentially, what happened in most nascent industries is people who don't have good metrics, they don't know how to run businesses, they kind of fall off to the wayside, and that's just a normal maturation process, I believe, in a lot of these industries. And everyone was expecting this to be the bloodbath year, anyways, where a lot of people who just liked cannabis, liked the idea of it, thought it was an easy way to make money, but didn't know how to run a business, kind of would fall out, and that's kind of happening. But you said that there's been seems like there's lower interest. I wouldn't necessarily say that. I still think there's strong interest, and everyone's predicting the market sizes to get bigger and bigger. But there's certainly going to be ups and downs within winners and losers within the industry, um, based on how well they're running their actual companies.
Got it. Okay. Um, and so I guess my last question here, as we come up to the 30-minute mark, is what's on your mind? Like, what are the major things that you're looking out for this year, that you would recommend, food execs or companies that deal in cannabis? What are some things that you're looking out for, as a legal expert in this field?
I think what the next step is people were waiting for state and governmental entities to set out the rules about how you can basically work with consumer products in this space, including food and beverages. And because there's been such a odd patchwork of state and federal laws in this space, and because there's been delays both in getting research as well as rolling out the regulations, what I'm seeing now on the ground is people are moving past that themselves. Either groups of companies or organizations, or they themselves are making sure that they're doing a handful of things in their businesses, so that whenever the regs are implemented, they're going to be in a good spot. And that is making sure that they are testing kind of religiously to make sure that their product is what it says it's supposed to be, that they're labeling it fairly accurately, that they're not making any exaggerated claims that they're not allowed to make. Um, and then a lot of it comes to do with sourcing of their products, both the hemp side and the marijuana side. The quality has to be fairly high, and I think consumers are starting to differentiate between products now. You can't just slap CBD on something and expect people to buy it now. Now they're looking at the different types.
Got it. Well, that's great. Paul, thank you so much for your time and sharing your thoughts and expertise in this field. And if people have questions and they want to contact you, what's the best way for them to reach you?
It's usually by email, pjoseph@foley.com.
Okay,
I appreciate you allowing me to talk about this topic. And the Food Institute seems like an excellent organization, and I've been following it since I first heard about it.
great. Well, thanks again, Paul, and thank you all for listening.